Carol. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this COVID update. Let's hope that this is the last presentation we'll be doing because statistics are definitely looking good, and hopefully we will be out of the woods. I guess we've still got a lot to do in terms of making sure that we do come out of this in the long run. But I thought it'd be good to look at an update for the research, particularly now, and let's see where we're at and what the research is currently saying. So I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll start the presentation and we'll be ready to go. All right, so, whoops. Now, can everybody hear me and see me? Hopefully you can. And I've got don't forget, we'll be staying on for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box and we will address them at the end. All right, so here we are. We're still talking about COVID. I know a lot of you are sick and tired of it, but I do think it's important to look at the research and what the research is saying, and I think that's going to really give us a good indication of where we are currently at. So, okay, so we know what it is. It's a respiratory. It's a virus that affects our respiratory system, and what we're now finding is there's other things that it's actually doing as well, not just affecting the respiratory system. And we'll hear tonight that there's also incidents of stroke and clotting, and I think that's of most concern, particularly when we know that people with MTHFR, an elevation in homocysteine may actually predispose us to clotting. I think this is probably one important factor that we do need to discuss. Here's our update in these figures. And if you look before, these were only at a couple of thousand, but we're now seeing that we're sort of, and that's even changed as of today, we're upwards of 200,000. So we are seeing that it is in the realm of swine flu, certainly not in the realm, or yes, SARS had 770, MERS 850, so we've far exceeded that. The Asian flu in 1957 killed 1.1 million people. So we definitely have seen history like this. The Hong Kong flu in 1968, 1970 killed 1 million people worldwide, but mostly in Asia. So certainly as far as, and this is what everybody is, I guess, you know, you'll hear a lot of conspiracy theories and you're hearing a lot of people talking about different things, and they're saying, well, is this any worse than any of these other major flus that we've had, these pandemics in the past? You can see the Asian flu, 1957 to 1958, 1.1. The Russian flu in 1889 killed 1 million. Hong Kong flu, 1 million. Swine flu, 200,000. So we're in the realm of that at the moment. So definitely it's no worse than others, but I guess proponents might say, well, if we hadn't locked down, could we be much higher? And there are reports that in China results or deaths were way higher than they're actually saying. So I think that's also a concern. Here's where we started. Do you remember our first presentation? And this was on the 24th of March, so exactly 1 month to the day almost, on the 25th of April. We have gone from 379,000 cases to 2.8 million cases. Our deaths have gone from 16,500 to nearly 200,000. And I did this on the weekend, so it's above the 200,000 at the moment. And we had 102,000 recovered, and now we've got nearly 800,000, which is good. But definitely things have progressed a lot in 1 month. So remember our signs and symptoms: the fever, the tiredness, the dry cough, the aches and pains, the runny nose. These are symptoms that most people would get just as a normal cold and flu, probably not the fever. But that's where it's been really hard to distinguish this between this and COVID. The good thing is now that in Australia we can pretty well get tested everywhere. So if you even suspect that you have the coronavirus, you can now go to free testing, and there are a lot of clinics, and the governments are actually encouraging everybody. And this is because A, we have a lot of tests now available, but B, because they want to know how endemic it is in the population. Originally, when we didn't have tests, they said the tests were only available for those who had been overseas or had come into contact with people that had been overseas. But now we have plenty of tests, and they really want to look at exactly how many people have it. And considering that we have increased our testing by about 200-fold, and we're still only seeing cases in Australia. I don't think we had more than 16 in the last 24 hours. That is a really good sign. So anyone who even thinks that they have a coronavirus or anything that could be slightly considered to be like it, you can go and get the free testings from the clinics, and every state has now free testings that you can, test clinics that you can go. So let's have a look at some of the research, and I think one of the big so-called saviors that they thought was a hydroxychloroquine, and this is an anti-malarial medication, and they thought the reason it worked, and we talked about this before, is it is a zinc ionophore, which helps to get zinc into the cell to stop the replication of the virus. But the latest research that came out on April 23 from this particular study said it didn't work. Now, whether or not we'll see more tests like this come out, who knows? But they said that the combination of this with the azithromycin actually didn't make any difference at all. And they went so far as to say that it was completely ineffective. And they actually had a great test done where they compared this versus just, whatever they were doing in terms of ventilators and whatnot, and it actually made absolutely no difference. So it'll be interesting to see where this progresses and what else, what interesting other medications that they've got that might be of help. This one was interesting, and I think it's very relevant, is that it is now being associated with the COVID-19 is being associated with thrombotic and thromboembolism. And this particular report study looked specifically at what happened in Spain and Italy but also what is currently happening in the US. And there have been people who have had limbs and legs amputated because it does increase the risk of thrombosis. Now, whether or not those people that are more predisposed to thrombotic events, so clotting, are more susceptible, and therefore the virus adds to that, they didn't know. However, I think it's really important for us to consider, and maybe down the track we'll see research that looks at clotting genes and MTHFR and whether or not people like that were more predisposed to getting the virus and having this particular side effect. We don't know. However, it is important to remember that homocysteine, elevation in homocysteine, is a precursor, or at least predisposes to clotting and thrombotic events and cardiovascular disease. So we do need to consider that maybe, hopefully one day they will look at that correlation between the homocysteine levels and perhaps COVID-19 and thrombosis, but we don't have any further research on that at the moment. But interesting, and this, as you can see, was only released on the 15th of April. The other thing that we saw, and I noticed that, I think we have a question about this, but I will answer that in a moment. COVID-19 also linked to large vessel stroke in young adults. And this was in New York. And they looked at people as young as 30 getting a stroke once they had actually got the coronavirus. Now, again, whether or not this is because of the thrombotic effects, they don't actually know, but it is definitely an issue with the more serious cases of the disease. And so what we're starting to see, where we originally saw the research only talking about the respiratory involvement and the lungs filling up and issues with that, at the moment they're starting to talk about thrombosis and stroke, and particularly in New York, where we're seeing a younger group dying from the virus, then it is way more alarming when we consider that people as young as 30 are actually getting a stroke post getting the COVID-19. It's not while they've got it, it seems to be once they have recovered. And there was also a study done in this one, are patients with hypertension and diabetes mellitus at increased risk for COVID-19 infection. So they said the comorbidities that they were seeing of 32 non-survivors from a group of 52 intensive care patients with the coronavirus, they found that 22% had cerebrovascular disease and 22% diabetes. They've followed, the other comorbidities in other countries and found that hypertension, 23.7% in those that died, diabetes mellitus, 16.2%, coronary heart disease, 5.8%, and cerebrovascular disease, 2.3%. They noticed that in a third study, 140 patients were admitted to hospital with COVID-19, 30% had hypertension and 12% had diabetes. So what they're saying is that this could well be the acute respiratory syndrome. It binds to their target cells through the ACE2. So we saw in the first and second presentation that the virus jumps into the body via the ACE2 receptors, and they are particularly expressed in the endothelial cells of the lung, intestines, kidney, and blood vessels. And this is why we're seeing, involvement with the blood vessels, because that's where the ACE2 receptors. And the expression of ACE2, they found, is substantially increased in patients with type 1 or type 2 diabetes who are treated with ACE2 inhibitors and angiotensin II type 1 receptor blockers. So one of the things that we talked about was whether or not those people on ACE2 inhibitors were more at risk, and what we call ARBs were more at risk to having an adverse effect once they got COVID-19. And the summary of this particular paper, which was released on March 11, was it said, we suggest that patients with cardiac diseases, hypertension or diabetes who are treated with ACE2 increasing drugs are at higher risk for severe COVID-19 infection, and therefore should be monitored for ACE2 modulating medications like ACE inhibitors or ARBs. The calcium channel blockers, though, they didn't see as a problem. So this research, this latest research, has suggested that yes, if you're on an ACE2 inhibitor or an ARB, you are more susceptible to having a worse case of the virus. The only research update I could find as far as preventative measures and treatments that were considered to be non-medical was this one in terms of lactoferrin. So lactoferrin is a naturally occurring and non-toxic glycoprotein, and you've probably heard about it before because it has been studied previously to having a range of it's been studied to have a preventative effect against a broad range of viruses like SARS that caused, and that's the close relation to the one that we've got at the moment. It has immunomodulatory and anti-inflammatory characteristics, and it's an oral supplement that we obviously get from bovine, from cows. So I thought that was quite interesting. They studied that and they said it, their summary was it could actually be quite a good preventative and is considered to be generally safe with no contraindications. And so obviously keeping our gut good and strong could actually be a good way to protect us going forward. The scientists, though, have, the studies coming out. It's great to see how quickly the scientific community has actually reacted to this worldwide virus. And what they're starting to see now is what we said before. There's definitely an increase in an inflammatory process, but we also get increase in antibody secreting cells, and that activates our immune response. And we get an increase in our immunoglobulins M and G. So IgM and IgG particularly, we see that in when we have a response to something that we're allergic to, we get an increase in particularly IgE, but we can also get an increase in the IgM and IgG. We get an elevation in CRP, or C-reactive protein. But interestingly, we have normal lymphocytes and neutrophils. So in those that the disease wasn't too serious, it actually didn't change our white cell count particularly at all. But we definitely got an elevation in CRP. Now, when you're normally reacting to a virus or some sort of acute condition, you'll see the white cell counts go through the roof. But they're not actually seeing that in the mild to moderate cases. And according to Dr. Rob Grenfell, the coronavirus is an RNA virus, and it's not as stable as DNA. And this is why we can see it mutate quite rapidly. And what they're saying is one of the difficulties with trying to prevent this is that you could have the virus. You can not know you have the virus. It can not really cause any symptoms in you, but it mutates and you pass on the mutated version to somebody else. And as it mutates, it gets more virulent. And we definitely saw that between the different viruses. So they now believe there's 115 genetic different versions of COVID-19, which is pretty scary. So how can you possibly, and this is the problem that we have with vaccinations with viruses generally, is that they have this tendency to mutate as they go, and then they change. And according to Professor Vassan, the virus is evolving into a number of distinct clusters in different parts of the world. So what happened in Wuhan might be a different virus to Spain, and we actually do see that if we can believe what they tell us coming out of Wuhan, what happened there is actually different to what happened in Spain and Italy, and that's certainly different to what's happening in the US right now, because we saw the older population getting affected by it very much so in Spain and Italy, but we're seeing a much younger group in the US, and it's pretty well affecting everybody. And so that's why making vaccines is actually quite difficult, and why coming up with different therapies. I mean, I guess from a naturopathic point of view, things that we do that generally across the board help with viruses, like our immune formulas and our zinc, they're all going to be very helpful when it comes to it. But in terms of having something that treats a virus, it's almost impossible to do because of the very nature of the change in these viruses. So what we saw is April 9, so we talk about vaccines now. On April 9, the journal Nature reported that 78 vaccine projects had been launched around the globe, with 37 more in development. So the biggest issue is that these vaccines require really large safety and efficacy studies, and they're trying to fast track them all, which I think is concerning. But they obviously are trying to come up with some sort of solution. But again, will it actually work? Because at the end of the day, these viruses are ever changing. Some people have said, well, because the virus is spreading quickly, some scientists have said, well, why don't we give people the vaccine and then deliberately expose them to the virus to see if the vaccine works, which is a huge risk. And we can't even say, well, let's take healthy young people, because the risk there is still going to be quite high. And that's, obviously the biggest issue. I'm actually just going to double check. Yeah, I am recording. Okay. So, and ethically, well, is that actually a great idea, to do that? And also, is it ethically okay to give someone a placebo and tell them that we're trialing a treatment, and then it turns out that we're actually not giving them anything and they die? So there's a lot of ethics around this as well. Of the confirmed active vaccine, there are 56 being developed by private industry developers, and 22 are in the academic and private sector and other non-profit organisations. And you can see here, these are the ones that are being explored. And as we talked about, in terms of the virus, there's a lot of different ways that you can actually approach killing it. You can look at jumping onto that spike protein and stopping that replicating. You can look at the ACE2 receptors. So at the moment, there's a lot of them, but what we can see is they're not progressing particularly well at this point, because some of them have already announced that they have failed. So I think it's a much harder thing to do. So April 2, CSIRO announced it was beginning testing of vaccines, and they had, the first one was an Oxford University, which is using an intranasal administration to clear the infection more readily and rapidly. I quite like that idea, because we know that nasal sprays can get into the head and the respiratory system and the nose really, really quickly. And I would imagine that they don't have the sort of excipients or adjuvants that a vaccine has. Queensland University were really ahead of the worldwide group because they had been looking at coronavirus for some years, and particularly after the SARS outbreak, they've been looking at that ever since. According to Professor Trevor Drew, it is very new to its human host, and we don't know how the virus will behave. It could evolve and become more dangerous, and we do need to be alert to the possibility it could get more virulent as it gets used to its new host. So in other words, it starts early, it's quite naive in nature, but as it gets transferred and a lot more people become used to it and a lot more people don't get affected by it, it mutates and it becomes more dangerous. And I think this is the stage that we are now going into, in that we are about to reduce our restrictions, which means a lot more of us are going to be out there. And I think this is becoming the most important time where we do our preventatives. We look certainly at, well, not preventatives per se, but certainly assisting the immune system to deal with whatever is going to hit us this winter. And it could be another flu, but we do need to protect our immune system at this point. And it looks like there's going to be human trials later this year. And the Queensland University specifically looks at the spike protein. I must admit, I don't like the fact that these vaccines are being fast-tracked and there's people being tested with them right now. We don't know enough about what they're testing and how they're doing it. And I think we need a lot more information before we could even consider having these vaccines. And as I said, you know, what the virus does today is not necessarily what the virus does tomorrow. And as you know, having a flu shot does not protect you from the flu necessarily, because every year the flu is mutating and it is changing. So at the moment, as of this morning, we have 6,711 cases Australia-wide, and 5,539 have recovered. So it's great that where infections have fallen to 0.2% and our total deaths are 83. So what does this mean for us going forward? You know, what do we do to protect ourselves and to ensure that, you know, we don't get the second wave? And there may be a second wave. So even though we're not seeing new infections, we've still got people with it in the community, or actually at home probably. But as soon as they come out and we see other flus hitting us for the season, I mean, I think the worst thing we could do is open our borders, and hopefully that will not happen. But we need to be even more vigilant, I think, now in this second wave. So protecting our immune system, just being sensible. I don't think we need to panic. I think the panic side of it, hopefully, we cross our fingers, is actually gone. But I do think we have to be vigilant and still do the same things in terms of, you know, washing our hands, making sure that if we're sick, we stay at home. And if we're out and about, just be sensible and take you know, sensible measures to ensure that you are looking after your immune system. Interestingly, I thought this was a good, I mean, if you look at this, the group of females in that 20 to 29 years of age are the ones in Australia who are picking up the virus the most. And I guess, you know, you could say, well, they're the ones that are out and about the most, but that's certainly not the 83 people that we have seen that have passed away because of the virus. They are the elderly, the people that came off the boat, the people with comorbidities. So, and as you can see, the younger group, 0 to 9, it's almost non-existent. And so it is interesting that the younger group are certainly picking it up, but for the rest of the population, it's pretty it's pretty similar. Interestingly enough, 40 to 49-year-old females are picking it up less than anyone else. And I guess the elderly, you would say, well, this group probably not so, because they have definitely been isolated. So I thought that was interesting that the younger group are picking it up. And that is probably because they're more social and they're more active and they're more out and about. So with restrictions easing, we really need to make sure we're protecting ourselves, take our preventative measures at all times, making sure that, and what I read a really interesting report to say, it lives in the nasal passages for at least, or it stays in the nasal passages for at least 3 to 4 hours before it's going into the system. So that nasal spray that we were talking about, to try and do your preventative nasal spray, which is antiviral, antimicrobial, antibacterial, may be a help when you come back inside or when you're out and about, to make sure that if you've got anything in the nasal passages, that it is not going further into the system. And it was really interesting that there have been multiple studies done on aeroplanes, and they say when the nasal passages dry out and you're exposed to pathogens in an aeroplane, keeping them moist and using things like eucalyptus nasal sprays can actually help you stop you getting sick. So I think that's a really interesting perspective on it, that it's often being picked up in the nasal passages first. So if we can flush them, they also at one stage talked about drinking water. I don't know what that would do, but they did say that, making sure that we've got plenty of fluid, so we're clearing out those passages are good. But I definitely think a nasal spray is a good support. Given that we're going into winter, they're talking about in the US that they're most concerned about them coming out of the summer and then having a second wave through the winter. So I think if we can really protect ourselves through the next few months, even with restrictions being eased, I think that will be really important to whether or not we do get a second wave. And if you do get a cold or you get flu-like symptoms, make sure you react quickly. If there's any thought whatsoever that you may have COVID, go straight and get the testing done. But if you do have any symptoms, make sure you get onto them really quickly, because it could be just a flu, it could be the cold, it could be a cough. Don't forget there's bronchitis and all sorts of things coming that come normally as a normal part of winter. Lots of coughs, lots of colds through winter, lots of flu. React quickly and get onto your supplements and get onto it before it gets too deep an infection. So again, with hopefully isolation will be eased over the next couple of weeks. We still need to do our social distancing. If you do have any symptoms of a cold or anything, make sure you stay at home. Continue to wash your hands with soap and water, hand sanitizers. Avoid touching your face when you're out and about. And if you feel that way inclined, cover your mouth with a mask and your nose when you're out in public. And definitely stay at home if you're not feeling well. Now, I promised you, the other thing is, please don't smoke. I mean, it's one of the worst things we can do in this environment. So make sure that if you are a smoker, go and get a patch or something as quickly as you possibly can, because we just don't want anything that is weakening the lungs. And I would also say that if any of you have asthma and you're prone to asthma, or you're prone to coughs, or you're prone to viruses, then make sure you've got some immune support for the winter that will protect you. And if you have a cough or you're susceptible to coughs, get a cough mixture. a herbal cough mixture so that we can support you. So the second you get it, you're onto that cough mixture pretty quickly, because it could be anything, the cough. But obviously, now that we can test, go and test. If you have any symptoms whatsoever, just go and test, and at least that'll make you feel better that you know that you either do or don't have it. So the things we discussed as antiviral support still stand. The vitamin C, zinc, the nasal spray, I think, is really important, given that we know that viruses tend to hold in the nose. The antiviral herbal immune support, we've got the cough mix as well, and definitely transfer factors. They're my best things for winter, to support and make sure that we are increasing our immunity against viruses per se. So we've got the mixes for winter: cough, sore throat, respiratory anti-inflammatory mix, melatonin. Don't forget, we saw that great study last time that looked at the antioxidant support and reducing those inflammatory cytokines. And particularly if you're prone to asthma and inflammatory processes in the lung, then quercetin is really a really good support, particularly through winter when you're prone to get respiratory infections. Now, I promised to give you a hand sanitizer recipe, and we'll send this copy of this presentation to you. But I found this chief medical officer of a company called Osmosis, and a former epidemic intelligence service officer. She gave us this, or she posted this, and I thought it was sort of a really nice, easy recipe. So 3/4 of a cup of rubbing alcohol, so it has to be at least 99%. I would say, if you've got vodka, use vodka, because it's a good one. 1/4 cup of aloe vera gel, and 10 drops of essential oils. Now, she just said such as lavender, but I've added in lavender, peppermint, eucalyptus, clove oil. Clove oil is antiviral, or any other oil. So tea tree would actually be another good one. So you could add, as many drops of these as you would like. I would definitely put in at least sort of 4 to 5 drops of the clove, and I'd put eucalyptus, but you could do a combination that you like. So I think that was a really nice recipe, so to speak. Some of them I've seen have got metho and things like that, and we don't necessarily want to be putting metho on our hands, but I thought that was a really good recipe for us to use to make your own, and it certainly would be quite effective. Now, you could also do a spray of the rubbing alcohol with your essential oils for your benches, your bench top, which would be, just a normal spray. And obviously you'd leave out the aloe vera gel. So that would actually be a countertop spray for your, home benches or anywhere that you wanted to spray. So I think that would actually be quite good. Now, as we said, we've got plenty of appointments. If you need any support for herbal consults or coughs through the winter, don't forget we've got those. Hopefully this will be the last COVID update we will do. Hopefully we won't need to do another one. But in case we do, we will. Excuse me. All right. So let's go to some questions now. Let me just... Questions. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Liz. I have a colleague in the UK who's currently treating her first case of a person recovered from COVID. The client's x-rays revealed lung lesions. Although the client is deemed recovered, the lung difficulties persist, breathlessness, oxygen saturation drops quickly, even just walking stairs. Wondering if you are seeing any research being released about lingering? Yes. So 100% the lingering lung lesions and breathlessness, they're suggesting could actually be for some, depending on how badly they got it, it could be there for life. But they are saying there could be a 30%, 20 to 30% residual down deficiency in their lungs going forward. Some may recover. It could take 3 to 6 to 9 months recovering. So what I would suggest that they do, if they've got access to respiratory mixes that we consider to be adaptogens for the respiratory, Liz, you know all about those, and everything that we can do to improve oxygenation, making sure that iron levels are okay, making sure exertion is not too much too soon, and really supporting lung function is the most important thing. But it is absolutely a side effect of the virus when it is particularly bad. So, and some studies, yes, have suggested it may never go away, but some studies are saying they hope that you could get 80% of lung function back. So that's a good question. From Rachel, I've ordered the respiratory inflammatory mix in case anyone in the family gets ill. Could you please advise dosage recommendations? So the dosages for as a respiratory anti-inflammatory are 5 ml 4 times a day. We can't say that we are treating COVID because we're not necessarily treating COVID. What we're actually doing is supporting the inflammatory process in the respiratory system. And so I think it's important to remember that we can't say at any point that this is a treatment for COVID. It is simply a support for the respiratory system, as it has great anti-inflammatory herbs in it. And I would say that, quite frankly, anybody that has lung issues, it would be a good mix just to support you going through winter. So if you often get a cough, or you often get bronchitis, or you've had pneumonia, it is a really good anti-inflammatory for the respiratory system. Vitamin D. If one has low D25 levels but normal active, should one still supplement to boost D25? All right. So essentially what that means is that we have 2 forms of vitamin D. The 125 dihydroxy vitamin D is our active. And technically you should look at your 125. I would say, however, that coming into the winter months, I would still take some level of vitamin D. It's probably that you're converting it differently than you should. But I guess it depends on your level of 125. So when you say normal, are they in the higher end of the reference range? So from mid to high is where you should be sitting. If not, I would still supplement with your vitamin D. But if it is sitting at the mid to high, then there's probably no need for you to do that. So the flu. All right, so here's the flu. So I actually answered a post on our website. So when I made the comments about the flu, my personal, this is where we have to be very careful, because if you say anything about a vaccine, you get into trouble. My personal point of view is that I do not take the flu shot. I've never had a flu shot, nor do I plan on having a flu shot, because I support my immune system and I use transfer factors every single winter. My husband also, who used to get the flu and the cold every single year, 5 years ago, I gave him the transfer factors. He takes his zinc every day. He's obviously looking after his immune system. He has not had a cold or flu or a virus of any sort, touch wood, for at least 5 years. If it was my job, if I could give transfer factors to every single elderly person in any any of these retirement villages or what, I would, because the problem with the flu shot, any flu shot, is the flu mutates. So what we're giving the shot for doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be immune from it. And I look at my mother-in-law many years ago when she used to get the flu shot every year, and she was sick as a dog for at least 8 to 12 weeks after she had it. So I'm not saying that we should have the flu shot. What I'm saying is, though, that the frontline workers are usually made to, because they're doctors and nurses, and they work with sick people, so they're usually made to have it. So when I said they must have it because they've got to have it, because that's where they're obviously, not everybody, but most of them are told that they need to have it for their work. So if you've got, you saw that particular study that we posted up on the second presentation that said in the US, they did a study that showed that if military personnel, this is in the 2017-18 flu season in the US, they gave all the vaccines for the different flus to the military. And the flu vaccines generally did stop them getting the flu. But the coronavirus was actually not helped at all by the flu shot. And in actual fact, they thought that they had a worse reaction. So I don't think there's any research to say that if you have the flu shot, you are actually protected from the flu. You might be less likely to get a certain strain. And I don't know the stats on whether or not the elderly are more likely. I think if you've got an immune function issue and you have an autoimmune disease, we know that live virus vaccines, if you have an autoimmune disease, you are more susceptible to having an adverse effect. And if you look at the research, when you give the live viruses to people with autoimmune disease in the family, they are more likely to get an autoimmune disease. And there's some really good studies around that. So are you more susceptible with a live virus if you have an autoimmune disease? Yes, the research says it does. But this whole vaccination debate is really difficult because we do have a choice, but there is too much pressure to always say the right things. And that's why I'm only saying what my personal point of view is and what I do. I can't advise you, unfortunately, what you should do. Vinegar. Now, I know that vinegar, and I think Liz told us last time it was antiviral. I don't know if it works as well as alcohol. I can't tell you if it does or doesn't. But I don't think there's anything wrong with using a pure alcohol. It's certainly not going to be detrimental to you to wipe it on your hands. Way, way better than the triclosan that is in the, the antimicrobial, antibacterial hand sanitizer that they're using in hospitals. So the triclosan is a proven endocrine disrupting hormone agent. And so, but you're definitely not going to get that from alcohol, but I can't tell you that the vinegar doesn't work as well, because I actually don't know the stats on that. Okay, a question, with the issues with MTHFR, methylation, COMT, etc., is it safe to have flu coronavirus vaccine? My mother used to make us have the flu vaccine up to mid-teens, and it made me feel as sick for a week or two, and I haven't had one since with no flu. So again, it's an interesting one, and funnily enough, on the weekend, I actually did look up the flu viruses, the flu vaccines that have just been released in Australia, which are the quadrivalent ones, which means they have 4 vaccines in them. And because I was really interested to see, and back when you used to have that, Christine, I would say they still had mercury in it. But I did check, actually did check to see whether or not there was any mercury in them. And I looked up all the text sheets and I could not see mercury in them. And it's one called quadrivalent. I'm just actually trying to find my notes from the weekend. So I don't think they would have. They don't seem to be having the adjuvants that they used to. But it is interesting. See, if you haven't had the flu and you're not susceptible for the flu, and you're at home through the winter, you know, I would have to say, why do you need it? I just, you know, I know I'm not being very helpful and very definitive, but I guess I'm just very wary of what I can and can't say. So the ones I looked up were Flu Quadri by Sanofi, Vaxigrip Tetra, and Fluarix Tetra. So these are the current, there's a couple of others as well, but these are the current flu vaccines, the 4 different flu vaccines that are currently in all the doctors' offices right now, and they threw in hundreds of millions of the vaccines so that we could have it for this winter. So I looked them up, and they do not have mercury in them, which is great. They do not have aluminium in them, which is great. So that makes me feel a little bit better. But I, as I said, I personally do not get the flu vaccine. I rely on my zinc and my transfer factors and building my herbs to build my immune system. And Christine, like you, I haven't had the flu ever since I've been taking the transfer factors for winter. So I would, I would actually probably just go with what you've been doing, I think. All right, I think that's all the questions we have. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. Let's hope we don't have to have another one of these. I think restrictions are definitely going to be eased over the next few weeks. So just be sensible. Make sure you are protected. Like I know many of you have ordered your mixes for your flu and your cough and your colds. Irrespective, we are coming into winter, and we do need to protect ourselves from the typical winter viruses and coughs and bronchitis and things like that we get. So, we just need to get through the winter, and hopefully we'll come out of it the other end. As long as we can stay, close our borders and keep down in lockdown, I think that bears, quite well for us. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I look forward to seeing you soon, and stay safe. Bye for now.